And now from matters tourism, let's shift focus to affordable housing. Owning a house remains a dream for the common mwananchi. However, factors such as the price of land and mortgage finance options still remains a hurdle. Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company CEO Mr. Joseph Oltetia enlightens us about affordable home ownership in Kenya. Our reporter Nicole Njigana with more.
Indeed, a very good afternoon to you. We are here at the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, where they offer long-term financial solutions to primary mortgage lenders, PNLs, which are banks, and SACCOs, which then offer these same benefits to the common mwananchi out there, with a focus most especially on lower and middle income earners in the country. We are joined by the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Johnston Oletetia, Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company. Thank you very much and welcome to the show. So starting off, what would you say is the achievement of the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company in terms of the loans that have been facilitated and the number of houses that have been, or other units that have been purchased so far?
Thank you, Nicole. So, so far we've done 10.5 billion Kenya shillings. And that has gone into about 12, actually not about 12 financial institutions. That is 7 banks and 5 SACCOs. You know, we finance both banks and SACCOs. Now, when you look at the distribution of the units that we've been able to finance, that's about 3,250 housing units, or mortgages for that matter. And I think that's, in our view, a significant contribution so far.
This has been a pertinent question among, especially in this affordable housing conversation. What exactly is affordable? How would you describe an affordable house?
That's a very good question. Now, there are 2 key things that underpin housing, or housing policy for that matter. Number 1 is accessibility. And number 2 is affordability, which is essentially what you're asking. And those 2 things go together. Now, accessibility is matching what is required or what people need with what is available. And that, to some extent, you can call a supply of housing issue. Now, affordability, on the other hand, is housing cost to income ratio. And that usually has to be low because you don't want to live in a house under pressure. And so affordability then means that your housing cost to income ratio should be about 30%. That's actually the universal standard, 30%. But it should be lower than that because you need to limit or remove the pressure, because of course I said you cannot live in a house under pressure. Now, it is unique to an individual. And that affordability thing, because I'm just focusing on that area, has to be very unique to a person. And that is because of the relationship with the income that you earn. So, for example, if you want to buy a home for 1.5 million shillings, it has to be affordable to you. And the affordability here is that you should be able to repay the loan, or you have capability or capacity to repay the loan. But you still nonetheless have to have disposable income that is still available for you to run other things. Otherwise, then you can be under significant pressure. That means your net income must not exceed 30% on housing alone, so that then you can be able to do school fees, you can be able to get food for your children and things like that. Of course, you know, housing is very personal. It's essentially to you.
Yeah.
It's essentially to your level of income. It is essentially to your preference, your needs, your family circumstances. So it's extremely a personal issue.
Let me still touch on the aspect of affordability, because according to data is that majority of Kenyans are earning below 50,000 Kenya shillings, and between just below 19,000, below 20,000, 19,999 Kenya shillings. This is where the majority of Kenyan earners are at. And we have between 20,000, between 49,999 Kenyan shillings. We have 32% of Kenyan earners, or the Kenyan population, and then now 50,000 Kenya shillings, the 50,000 Kenya shillings bracket to 149,000 Kenya shillings. We have that at 18%.
Yeah.
So where does KMRC fit in all of that?
That demographic distribution is actually an important aspect for purposes of managing that housing policy. Mm-hmm. The numbers demonstrate that you can only cover certain areas. So that's why you have heard of social housing, which essentially can only be provided by government. And that is mainly for very, very low income people who will not be able to afford a mortgage. KMRC falls under the mortgage gap, which is that 50 to 150 or 149,000. That's why we have put some limits on the income threshold, because our idea is essentially to try and push financing down market, and that was identified as an area that actually is lacking. While the demographic distribution is showing that it's about 18%, and there are a lot more income earners who are below that, who are actually the majority of the Kenyans, the distribution is nonetheless useful, so that then you can target the area. So KMRC purposely will be targeting the 50 to 149. Government will then target the other demographic areas. That's social housing and upgrades and things like that.
Would you say that is affordable to the common mwananchi?
Yes, the KMRC part is actually considered affordable, because the income distribution that we are looking at is a factor of the size and the cost of the home that we are talking about. So if we'll be able to put or bring housing into the market that are within that range, then certainly people will be able to afford. And that is exactly why government is also very focused on this affordable housing issue, because the supply side has an issue. While you can have demand, which is essentially end user finance, which is what we provide, supply is very, very important. And supply is important if it is affordable, and it obviously has to be affordable. We've had government talking about constructing houses using public land. That's one way of bringing the cost down for it to be affordable, because land alone contributes between 30 to 40% of the cost of a house. And that, if that is sorted out, then that housing unit, of course, will be affordable.
Let me now move on to off-plan arrangements. Most units or homes in the market are through off-plan power, which is offered by personal loans from banks and SACCOs. We have seen Unity Homes being able to offer off-plan mortgages through ABSA, courtesy of you guys. So then how can such an arrangement be extended further to other financial institutions so that more Kenyans can benefit from the same?
So there are two things here. Number one, we have what we call incremental housing development, which is essentially what has been going on with the SACCOs mainly. An incremental housing development is a situation where you take a loan, you buy a plot, you potentially clear that loan, you take another one, you start the construction in phases over time. So that's an incremental housing development, which is very, very popular in Kenya. The only impediment is actually financing, and that's why the innovation now is coming for people to start doing off-plan, and that's why KMRC is supporting off-plan mortgages. Now, the most important thing about that is the credibility of the developer. That obviously any investor into that home or borrower will have to focus. In most cases, you of course need to check to ensure that you don't take a risk and then you lose the funds. The thing that is not making it popular is a historical market situation in our market. There have been a number of developers that are doing what they call off-plan constructions. So you invest into that. But in certain cases, you don't get the home, you've lost the money, and that becomes a problem.
You've actually just preluded the next question I was about to ask you, which is the big challenge with off-plan mortgages, such that financiers are not willing to get into it. Let me ask, what is the advantage rather of the same that can make home ownership more accessible to Kenyans?
The biggest advantage is the fact that an off-plan arrangement is cheaper than the market. So when the construction starts, they tend to increase the cost because, of course, it's funded mainly potentially through banking and that kind of thing.
We recently saw President Ruto assenting into law the affordable housing bill, which will mean that now Kenyans start paying the 1.5%, and then it's matched by the employers.
Yeah.
So to what extent will this program accelerate the uptake of KMRC mortgage?
So when you see what government is doing, which is extremely useful, and in fact, if I can just take a step back, any priority core issue like housing anywhere around the world need to have government support. In fact, for it to succeed, government has to support it. And that government has to support it because you have the social needs of people who will never be able to afford a home otherwise than through subsidies, like what government provides.
We have seen different macroeconomic shocks into the economy, fluctuation of the dollar, high cost of fuel, high shipping costs, high transportation costs. So then how viable is the 9.5 single-digit interest rate for you people as KMC when you look into the future?
You're right. The current macroeconomic circumstances are just changing. So like, for example, last year and part of this year, the inflation has been shooting. Of course, there have been cyclicalities on the forex market, and that also affects cost of inputs. Now, the effect on the funding we provide is mainly driven by one constant, the source of funds. So KMRC is funded through mainly concessional financing. Now, that concessional financing is mainly sovereign. So it's borrowing from World Bank, African Development Bank, through government to KMRC. The rates are good if the borrowing is done through government. So the rates essentially by World Banks to the government are, that's why it's called sovereign, because they're lending to a government or to a country for that matter. So that is what will influence the sustainability of the single-digit rates. For the foreseeable future, as long as we can raise financing at concessional rates, we want to retain single-digit rates.